Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we talk about following Jesus and the tension of being in the world, but not of it. And we got a special one in store for you today. One of my favorite interviews that we've done. Harrison Scott Key is on the podcast today, and he's the author of several books, the latest of which is called How to Stay Married, which isn't a self-help book on how to stay married as much as it is a memoir, his story of his own marriage, his marriage that blows up, and the story of him figuring out if he can put it back together or not. Harrison's a follower of Jesus. He's a professor and an author. We have a great time together, and I think it will encourage you. Here we go. Well, Harrison, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Man, thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Hey, so for people who don't know you, maybe haven't read your book, do you mind just giving people a gist of your latest work, How to Stay Married?
Ooh, that is a difficult gist to give. This book is a little bit like a kaleidoscope. It sort of hits people wherever they are. It is, on the surface, a book about marriage. Obviously, it's called How to Stay Married. And if you read the cover and if you read the back cover, it looks like the story of what happened when I found out my wife was having an affair. And so it sort of presents itself as being a book about either a very specific marriage or all marriage. Really, it's about 16 different books in one. I've described it as a sort of true crime romance. At the very beginning, my marriage dies, or so I think. And so the question is, who killed it? Who were the suspects?
Yeah.
And the whole book is, in a sense, and not just that, but what does God have to do with all that? Marriage is historically a religious institution. And so love, forgiveness, commitment, trust, all these things are bound up in the story of marriage. And those are also things that are bound up in the story of faith. And so in this true crime story, I sort of set myself up as the Sherlock Holmes to figure out who killed this thing, who killed my marriage, and is it really dead? Can it come back to life? It's also really funny, and that could be very upsetting to a lot of people because I wouldn't necessarily call it a Christian book, although many people have, and I'm fine with that. Christians, it turns out, buy lots of books, so I'm happy for Christians to think it's a Christian book. It's probably the only book that was nominated for Book of the Year by Christianity Today that has like at least 13 F-bombs in it, which I take as a personal badge of honor.
I mean, that's one of the things I love the most is I've never encountered a book that had so many meaningful scripture references and so many F-bombs. It was a unique book to read.
I don't really have any, I'm not a pastor. I don't work for a church or a parachurch organization. So I just don't really care what people in sort of the established hierarchy of Christianity. I don't really care what they think. And I mean that in the nicest, kindest, most creative way. I don't have, if some people, there's a lot of people who find the book very offensive, and I'm like, great. Maybe I didn't write this book for you. It's totally fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I loved about it, honestly. I mean, I'm a pastor. I read books by Christians all the time. Almost all the books by Christians that I'm reading are written by Christian leaders in the established church in some way. And you were able to write from a perspective from your faith that was so honest and raw. And I just was drawn to it. And I think, it just helped me realize that all of us Christian leaders, the public persona that we put forward, we have to kind of curate it a little bit. We have to maybe hold back some of the deepest, darkest stuff because of our role as the leader of a community. And so to see somebody just really wrestling in the most honest way with their faith, with their doubt, with the hurt, I mean, it was something that was really beautiful to me.
Yeah, it's sort of like reading books on politics by people who are in politics. Right. You're not going to get the whole story because they have too much to lose. And somebody like you in a position, you can't get away with some of what I probably got away with because I'm in a slightly different position. And that was very freeing. I really didn't want to write a book that was I mean, originally I was writing just a funny book about growing up in the church. And in the midst of that is when I found out that my marriage was
Yeah.
exploding and over. And I was like, maybe this isn't a book about the church. Maybe this is a book about me wrestling with all these sort of eternal verities of the church and my
Yeah.
experience with it and how those play out in my marriage.
I'm curious, we talked a little bit about the angle of Christian leaders writing books. You're actually, coming from the marketplace. You said you didn't write this for Christians, really. Curious for you, as you were trying to, get your work out there and become well known as an author. Was there any wrestling on your part of how much to bring your faith into your writing? Were you concerned about a secular audience not being able to, maybe not able, but not willing to go with you if you were to talk as much about your faith as you did?
Well, this is my third book. So I have an established platform and a readership that is not at all Christian. It's just a general readership. And, if you're a believer and you read my first two books, The World's Largest Man and Congratulations, Who Are You Again, which are also both memoirs, one about really fatherhood, masculinity, the American South, and the second one is really about the American dream. If you read those books and you're a believer, you could probably tell, like, I think this guy's a Christian. I dropped some references to church or going to church or the Bible, but I had to be very judicious about that because it took me years to sort of shake off the mantle that if you're an artist and you are a Christian, then you have to be a Christian artist. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, capital C, capital A. You have to always be proselytizing, or at least not making the church look too bad. And that was a tremendous burden as an artist and very unhelpful. And I went to a Christian undergraduate institution and then secular grad school. But I really felt that burden that I was supposed to be using my talents for God. And it didn't take me long to realize that if I was coming in too hard with the proselytizing and evangelizing in my work, it was going to be really bad work. Nobody was going to read it or care. The only people who were going to like it were people who I didn't even need to be talking to because they already believed.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it took me a long, long time to realize, like, oh, wait, in a sense, in like graduate writing programs, I saw that everybody else was trying to also do what Christians are trying to do. All the various political ideologies, they were also trying to proselytize in their work. And it made their work bad too. And the best art was always art that didn't necessarily omit faith or omit ideology, but spoke about it with a clarity that was rare, and with this mixture of like clarity and doubt, or clarity and curiosity. And I'm not talking about great books like, every Christian just dies over C.S. Lewis. We all love C.S. Lewis, and he was a one of a kind, a rare gift. I'm just talking about any kind of novel. Like, if C.S. Lewis only wrote the space trilogy, would we call him a Christian artist? I don't know. Maybe I don't know. We might or might not. It just took me a long time to realize that if I wanted to be engaging for readers, all I needed to do is tell a great story in which true things happened and people behaved like people. Flannery O'Connor says that's all a story is. It's just people behaving like they do. And I was like, oh, because that's true. And God is a God of truth. So as long as I'm writing a story that feels honest about how the world really is, that is a Christian story.
Yeah.
And it took me years to figure that out.
That's awesome. Hey, I'd love to maybe switch gears a little bit and just talk about your experience as a Christian in the church. One of the things I've found is that for many reasons, church actually can be a really hard place to go through the hardest things. When you encounter that your marriage dies, as you put it, you were around faith communities. And I'm curious, what was your experience like with the church walking through that? Was the church a place that was helpful to you? Was it a place that felt judgmental, condemning, distant? I'm curious, as somebody who's not a Christian leader walking through something like this, how did the church come alongside you in that?
Um, you know, every church is different, and people ask me, like, what would you tell church leaders after this experience? I don't know, man. I mean, the best way to describe it is that and anybody's read the book knows what happened. We were at this fairly large, not like mega church large, but a large historic downtown Presbyterian church, full of very kind people. But it was almost like a 19th century church culture, of kind of overemphasizing piety and us versus them. The church is safe and beautiful and awesome, and the world is terrible, and we have to, all these sermon after sermon sounded like the dad who was a pastor in the movie Footloose.
Yes.
Like sermon after sermon, we're just like evil, evil, and it's like obviously there's great truth to that, but it wasn't resonating. It didn't resonate in the contemporary context. It felt like, maybe the culture wars are over, dude. We lost. You just gotta like stop. Like you are the losers. We are all the losers. So stop trying to fight that battle. What it felt like when my marriage exploded and my wife told me she was in love with our neighbor. Um, what it felt like in the context of church was a little bit like if if I was watching a movie and it's like sometimes people bring a baby to a movie and the baby starts crying. And what does everybody in the movie want? They're like, just take the baby out, man. We're just trying to watch the movie. It felt like that. It felt a
Yeah.
little bit like my marriage was a crying baby, and everybody was like, man, that sucks that your baby's crying. Can you get it out of here so like we can do our thing? And you can bring the baby back once it like stops crying. It
Right.
felt like it wasn't like get out of here. It was more like we have to solve this problem as quickly as possible so that you can continue having an awesome sham of a marriage that looks awesome to everybody.
Right.
And there was nobody came out with me, like if a lady, if the baby cries in the movie theater and then somebody they see the mom struggling with the baby and then they get up and they help the mom take the baby out. That's what you need in a church.
Yeah.
And that's what happened in our new church, but not in our old church.
Yeah. Man, it's just, there's something so tragic about that because, when you read the Gospels and you look at Jesus, it wasn't like that. It was the people who were most hurting, the people who were in the raw places that actually were drawn to him. And it was the religious people trying to just go along with, the movie theater, if you will, or just the show of religion that Jesus actually didn't have much time for. And yet somehow it's so easy for our churches to be the opposite of that. What was different about your new church community? What was going on there that God used in a way that was unique?
A lot of people don't like me saying this, but the number one asset of the new church is that it was small. And in a small church, you can't ignore where everybody's got a crying baby and there's nowhere for them to go because everybody's got one, so to speak. It allowed for an intimacy and a vulnerability among all of us who were members of that. It was a church plant for many years. It just particularized like a year and a half ago, but it was so small that we were all in each other's lives. It was not like a Benedict option type environment by intention. Rod Dreher is a friend of mine, and he and I have talked about that, how our church, because it was so small and because it was a neighborhood church, like I ride my bike there, like it is something about it made it, you couldn't fake it. I could fake things at the big church, but I could not fake things at the small church. And my wife, she hated that at first. She loved the anonymity of a big church, and she didn't like the small church. And I knew, and I felt like this is the place where we have to be because I needed to be around people, and there was just no BS. And so when things were said in judgment, like you shouldn't be doing that, it was always in love because these were friends. These were people who were like, what the heck is wrong with you? Why are you being an idiot right now? As opposed, and when that comes from somebody, a pastor or a member of the staff who you don't necessarily know very well, it's that comes off as hateful and cruel, and it comes off as unloving. So the size of it made it so special. It's not like we advertised my wife's affair and our separation to everybody constantly. It was a small group of, say, 4 families. And that's advice for anybody whose marriage is falling apart. Like, you've got to talk to 3 people when your marriage is falling apart. You obviously need to talk to your spouse, and you need to talk to a therapist. Highly recommend talking to a therapist. I think you can get good therapy from a pastor. You can get rather good counseling, but a therapist, I highly recommend. And then third, you have to talk to your friends. Like, fourth, of course, you're praying and you're talking to God and you're reflecting constantly. That's usually the first thing that you're doing because you're so desperate. But having friends, having a core group, and if you don't have that, you are living in a house without fire insurance, man. Like, you've got to have a group of friends.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a word to us who our marriage isn't falling apart right now. Like, this is the moment to get those friends, because it's going to be really hard when your marriage is falling apart to find the friends that are going to walk through you with that if you don't have them before you go into it. Yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying. I am a pastor of a large church, and yet everything that you're saying about the need for a small church, I would endorse completely. And I think that's one of the things I've seen just being in a large church environment is plenty of people are able to find that small group, the small church thing with the people that you can't hide from within a big church. But if you're at a big church, you have to intentionally pursue that, because if you don't, you will just sit in the anonymity of being in a room of 500 people or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And yet that's never going to actually be the real community that's helping you follow Jesus. You're always going to have the people who see beyond the public version of you when you show up to church.
Yeah, very true.
One of the things I loved just about your journey and what you shared in the book was the way that you refused to step into the role of the victim, at least entirely. Obviously you were a victim in some ways, but the way that you were willing to own your own part in your marriage. And I mean, honestly, at times, reading it, I felt to me like you were taking on too much of the responsibility, but I loved it because it is so much easier to sit in that us versus them mentality, to figure out who the enemy is and just sit with that because it makes you feel better. How did you resist the allure of that kind of thinking?
Well, I mean, it definitely helped. You do feel highly victimized at first. I mean, you're just angry, and you've got every right to be angry when your spouse has an affair. Or when any other kind of betrayal happens, you have every right to be angry. That's a real anger, and it's good, and it's necessary, because what has happened is a terrible thing has happened, and it's good to be sad and upset and angry about that. So I did feel that way. But I have the terrible misfortune of being a man. And so I was like, playing the victim role just didn't feel natural to me, like pity party. I mean, I was pitiful, brother. Man, I was pitiful. I'm talking about, I had some sad, sad days where I cried myself to sleep. And I'm like, you look like a big baby right now, Harrison, crying yourself to sleep. But it helped to have, for one, I had 3 children at home, 3 young daughters. And I'm like, somebody's got to take care of these people. And a little pity party baby daddy won't do it. I got to be strong. Also had good friends who said important things like, if you need help, you got to call me. Or they brought food to me. They let me focus on what was most important, and food wasn't the most important thing at the time. One of my good friends, who's in the book, a guy named Jimbo, he's an elder at our church. I play in a band with him. He's a therapist, great guy. He said, you don't have to, you didn't cause this affair, and I don't want you to think that, but you do need to think about how you made your marriage a place where somebody wouldn't want to be. And that's a really important question for any married person to ask.
Mm.
What am I doing to make my marriage maybe not fun? And and all of a sudden I had something to think long and hard about. It was very easy to see red and to hate my wife and to hate her boyfriend. And that was awful and terrible, but that was then. Maybe she would never come home. I couldn't solve that problem, but I can definitely work on what I see in the mirror. And so that became a big focus during the separation of like, all right, who are you, man? Can you be a single dad? Can you hold down two jobs while you're doing it? Can you take care of your children and get the laundry done? I mean, I started making lists. I was like Mr. Mom, man. I bought whiteboards and put up meal schedules, and I was just trying
Yeah.
to get my head around it. You know, when you're busy doing that, it's real hard to be a victim. And I was very honest with my wife. I was like, Lauren, this was like during the worst part of it. I was like, this obviously really sucks. All that this is happening. I was like, it really sucks for you that like you're living with this guy because he's just awful. Like, I know you love him. I was like, that just really sucks for you. I was like, it's going to really suck for our children for a long, long time. And will require lots of therapy, I think. I was like, I told her, I was like, but I feel like I'm going to come out okay on this thing. I was like, whether you come back or not, I was like, I've got a great career. I mean, it sounds so weird and egotistical to say it now, but it really made me feel good at the time. I'm like, you know what? Just the thought of like dating other women, like that wasn't a bad thought. My wife had just left me. She was gone.
Right.
And just the
Right.
thought of like dating other women, I was like, this could be fun. This could be cool. I'm on an adventure. So it became the way that I was able to kind of get out of that victim loop was to realize I was on a freaking grand adventure and I was going to change. My world was going to change. Something was lots and lots was going to change. And so that really helped me sort of open my eyes to goodness all around me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I I got to read your books in reverse order. I was introduced to you through your latest book, and then I got to read your story of just pursuing your dream of being an author and getting a book published. And having read How to Stay Married and then going backwards, obviously the story of your marriage falling apart was on my mind, and I was interested just in the connection between the ambition of career and of trying to, publish a book and all the hours that takes and the commitment that it takes and just, the unwavering setting your eyes on something and getting after it, and the relationship between that and your home and your marriage. And, I'm curious for people out there who are like you, who are like me, who have ambition in the workplace and, desires for things in a career, like, would you do anything differently? Would you go back? Would you caution somebody in how to balance your home life and your work life?
Oh, definitely. I would do so much differently. Um, I mean, I was an idiot. I just, yeah, I mean, you could see the story of sort of my marriage from a bunch of different angles, and they would all be true. The things that you were looking at, but I mean, it's not a secret that um, in that second book, I really talk about what most, not just creative people, but in my experience, so many men deal with. Women deal with this too, but I've never been a woman. I'm a man, and I'm going to talk about what men feel and experience. And this immense pressure to provide for your family, to provide stability, to conquer something in the world, to build something really beautiful, whether it's a business or a church or a career as an artist. Um, I felt that, which is the urge of the artist and the dream of the artist, but I also felt this tremendous responsibility to provide for my family. And those two things together, I've got to do something really big in the world. I've got to build something, write something, publish something, whatever. And then I need to provide stability for my family. Those two things really blinded me to my wife and to what was
Mm.
going on at home with young children in the house. I mean, she worked from home. I mean, she was a stay-at-home mom for many years when the girls were small. At least the first 6 years, of us having 3 children. She was a stay-at-home mom, so that was really her focus, and that was our choice and her choice. She wanted to do that. She had been raised that way, and she wanted to do that. But then became like on separate tracks. She was on this track of being a mother, and I was on this track of providing and of writing. And those tracks, they were parallel, but then they just they veer, and they veer so gradually. And that is a story of every marriage. That is every marriage. And so the constant course correction is so hard. And that's why therapy can be so valuable, because it gives you this place where you're not fighting, but you're talking about all the big issues with this mediator person there, who hopefully is asking encouraging questions and kind of leading you to discovery. But really, they're just a referee. And you're there talking, and you're listening to your wife say things to this therapist, and she's listening to you say things. And you're hearing stuff that if it was brought up at home, in the bedroom, in the kitchen, on date night, it would cause a fight. Even if it's said with love or said with honesty and kindness, it would cause a fight. At least it would have for my wife and me. And the farther apart you get, the harder it is to have those conversations.
Yeah.
Because then, like, why don't you come home from work early anymore like you used to? Well, why are you saying that? You start getting defensive, and then it just goes nowhere. And so, I would do a lot differently. And it would be fascinating for somebody to read the marriage book first, How to Stay Married, and then to read the other two. And even in the first book, there are chapters about my marriage and sort of me seeing patterns of my father in myself with my wife. And I always saw my father as, just the worst misogynistic, retrograde, hillbilly redneck football coach. And in that first book, realizing like, oh, I'm kind of just like him. And so somebody commented on Instagram, somebody shared about the book and tagged me. But they said something I thought was really interesting, how she saw these 3 books as a trilogy about what it was like to be self-aware and sort of growing in consciousness, what it was like to struggle to become a writer and have this career and a family. And you really could see all 3 as they are written where you could read them in any order or just read one of them and still get the whole story. But it definitely feels like a trilogy, which is totally weird because I never meant it for it to be like that.
It really does. Yeah. I mean, even in Congratulations, Who Are You Again, there's a couple spots in there where you question, is my wife going to have an affair? Is my wife going to leave me? Like there was some things going on there where you had some sense of some trouble ahead, and that, so it was interesting to read them in that order. I'm curious, just in your own faith, in your relationship with Jesus, how did this season of your marriage change that? And when you're alone in the quiet with just you and God, I mean, what's different today from where you were before you discovered the affair?
Well, that's a good question. I think God is a lot funnier now than I used to, and a lot more forgiving than I realized that he was. And I have been, I've gone through experiences that have made me stronger. I was just thinking this today, how to have gone through something like that and felt like knowing that I wasn't alone, and that God that God had blessed me with beautiful, abundant things all around me constantly, including my wife, and my children and my friends and my career and my home, and being so grateful for those things, so much more grateful. I was grateful before, but I didn't realize how suddenly everything could change. I think I'm more likely, and I think this is true of Lauren too. I think we're more likely to be vulnerable with people and let people in than we were before. This was, I think, as extroverted as I am, I was not always vulnerable with other people. I was on the page. That was like a safe place to do it, even though everybody was reading it, which is
It's
not
a weird
safe at
thing,
all.
isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I feel like
So,
it's easier for me to be vulnerable on a stage in front of hundreds of people than it is in a one-on-one conversation, which is a
yeah.
weird thing.
And now that I've written this book, I get weird messages from everybody around the world, man, telling me the most intimate stuff. And that's not vulnerability because I don't know them and I'll never see them in
Right.
real life. But even people I encounter in real life, former students, people I haven't seen in 20 years will call me or find me and they'll say, "Hey, man, same thing happened to me." Or, "Hey, man, I cheated on my wife and the same thing happened to
Hmm.
us. And I wanted to tell you that blah, blah, blah." So in some sense, I've had to be more vulnerable because it's happening to me. And when you tell your story to people, man, they will tell you their story.
Yeah.
And so that's my advice. If anybody's struggling with finding friends or being vulnerable, just tell your story to one person and they will tell you their story. And all of a sudden, you have this beautiful connection with this person. And so, I've got buddies who I can, if they're struggling, like if they just had a big fight with their wife, or if I've just had a big fight with Lauren, we'll call each other. "Hey, you want to get a beer? Because I got to blow off some steam. I don't know what's going on, man." And we'll talk about it and complain and ask each other for advice. That never would have happened before. So I have much more interesting, authentic, stronger relationships. I think it's much easier for me to give people the benefit of the doubt when something goes
Hmm.
terribly wrong in their lives. That it's not a church versus the world or an us versus them. Like everybody is lonely and scared and hurting, or in some stage of recovery from being lonely and scared and
Yeah.
hurting. And they're going to be lonely and scared and hurting again later. Just realizing, like, oh man, we are all in the image of God and we are all lost and scared and hurting and just trying to get each other out of the rain a little bit, whether you're a believer or not. Just being able to see the world with those eyes is a new thing for me.
That's cool. Got one last question for you. At our church here, in the last year, we went through something where one of our high-profile leaders, it came out, had an affair and had been secret for a long time. And so our church was, reeling with that a little bit and trying to figure out how to navigate. One of the things that I observed as a pastor, of just what the result of that was a lot of couples thinking about their own marriages, and especially like our younger people who are just either they're engaged or they just got married, they're trying to figure it out. There was this sense of inevitability that I heard from a lot of people of, man, if somebody like this has an affair, is it just a foregone thing that that's gonna happen to us, that our marriage is gonna blow up in some way? And I'm just curious, having walked through that yourself, like what would you say to that couple who just got married this year, or somebody who's thinking about getting married, or even maybe somebody who's been married for a long time and things are a little tougher than it used to be? I mean, what would you tell them that you've either learned about marriage or advice you'd give, or even just anything you'd say to somebody in that spot?
I would say that that an affair is definitely inevitable, unless something is done about it.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it can happen to anybody, and it has nothing to do with piety or perceived piety or willpower or strength of character. Some people don't struggle with, everybody's got different sin and different temptations. And, for me, I had lots of temptation and I work at a university and I'm traveling the world and I'm on book tour and I'm often doing that alone. I had many, many opportunities. And I was very aware, like, wow, I think this is how you have an affair. You're in a hotel in a faraway place and there's this really hot lady at the bar and she's talking. And you know what? She's not being mean to me like my wife was last night. It is so
Yeah.
easy. That wasn't that's not my particular stumbling block. Although it very easily, quickly could be. My temptations are much more nefarious and hidden. The temptation to be cruel or to
Hmm.
ignore, or to resent, or I mean, those are so hard because they're invisible and you can do them constantly,
Yeah.
and when you without breaking any commandments on the surface. But I will say that one in four marriages experiences infidelity. And I will also say that couples who experience infidelity and then go to therapy together after have a higher success rate of continued marriage than couples who've never experienced infidelity and have not gone to therapy.
Interesting.
That's huge, which means because now you see the person fully. You see everything that they're capable of, and they see everything that you're capable of. So you have nothing to hide from each other. But I would say that marriage is scary as hell, and because it will expose every terrible thing about yourself. And some of the wisest people I know are divorced people, because they realize this. Because when you get divorced, you can go one of two ways. When anything bad happens in your life, you can go one of two ways. You can get better or you can get bitter. And a lot of people do get bitter, and they never learn anything, and they just get resentful, and they continue to be destructive and make destructive choices emotionally or spiritually or physically, whatever. But I've met so many divorced people who have been through the fire, and they have seen how much of themselves was exposed in the marriage and in the divorce. And they've used that to get better, to be more loving, to be more forgiving. It will happen. And it may not be a physical affair. It may be an addiction. I've seen lots of marriages destroyed by addiction where both couples were totally faithful, or financial problems, or just absolute contempt for each other. The couples would never have an affair, but they really hate each other. Like at least have an affair to make it fun. It will happen to everybody. Every marriage is going to go over the falls, often many times. And the question is, it's not how do you avoid going over the falls? It's how will you go over together, and how will you survive when you land? And maybe marriage is how you change. Maybe not escaping the marriage or avoiding marriage is how you change. Maybe the marriage itself is the means of change.
That's really good. I think it's a good word for all of us who are married. I mean, it will happen if you don't do something to stop it. And if you just let the inevitable path of two human beings living together, trying to make it work, like it's guaranteed to blow up. So you got to work on it. I love that. Harrison, this has been great, man. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your story. It was encouragement to me, and I know it will be to a lot of others as well.
Wyatt, you seem like a kind and intelligent guy. The people at your church are very, very lucky to get to hear you every week. So thanks for letting me come on the show and talk for a second.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. If you did, please go ahead and check out Harrison's book, How to Stay Married. And man, if you read that, you will laugh, you will cry. When I read it, I could barely put it down. I finished it in just a couple of days. There's just something so raw, so honest, so beautiful about the way that he shares the story of he and his wife, Lauren's marriage. And whether you're married or not, I really think it will encourage you. And I just love the way that it pointed to the reality of what marriage is, that marriage is not just something for us to enjoy, but it's something for us to be shaped by, that God actually uses marriage to convict us of our own sin, of our own brokenness, to teach us the meaning of forgiveness and even of his relationship with us. So I really do think you will love it if you pick it up, and we will wait to talk to you again on Native Exiles. See you next time.